Hey everyone, and welcome to Great Lakes Church Online. My name is Carson, and it's such a privilege to have you joining us. If you don't know who we are a community of people helping people find and follow Jesus. We're based in the southeast Wisconsin area with one physical location in Kenosha, but hopefully many more locations as you tune in on YouTube or any podcast platform to check out this week's dose of encouragement. We hope that whatever you hear today prompts you to take the next step in your faith journey. And if you'd like to know more about who we are, get involved through giving, or just join us in our physical location, go to greatlakechurch.com to find everything you need to know. But until then, enjoy the talk.
I will never forget the first time I ever went to Haiti. It's a beautiful place with beautiful people, and it's totally different than anything we ever experience here. We had taken a group of students over there to work with other students and offer we called it VBS, which is short for Vacation Bible School. It's where our kids went, and they led singing and teaching and crafts and games and all that kinds of stuff. It was an awesome experience. And one of the other adults on the team that had come to kind of help corral people and make sure that everybody stayed safe and all that good stuff was a guy that I had grown up with. In fact, he lived next door to my grandma, and anytime we were playing outside, me and my siblings, he was the weird guy next door that would make noises and mess with us and try and scare us. And so he came along on the trip, and I really just bonded with him. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you've gone away with someone on some kind of adventure like that, and because of the shared experience, you just feel this connection. And on the last night of the trip, we were laying in our bed, and we were in this room, kind of like a dorm room, and so several bunk beds all over the place. And what you need to know about the area of Haiti that we were staying in is there's no electricity. It's all run by generators in the single home. And at night, they would turn the generator off so that they didn't continue to burn through gasoline, which was so expensive. And so the lights are off, and there's not a lot of other light. I mean, it is as black of night as it has ever been that I've experienced, at least. And we're laying in bed, and it's really late. We're exhausted from a long week of work, and we're getting ready to get on the airplane to go home tomorrow. And I just started to pour my heart out to my friend Dan, just telling him how much he's always meant to me, how much I look up to him, how much I respect him, how awesome of a dad I think he is, and a friend and a leader. And he had just retired from being a teacher. I was telling him what a great teacher he was. I mean, I was really laying it on thick. Now, I meant every word I was saying, but I was really pouring it on. And I get done, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I was expecting more than utter silence. I mean, he didn't say anything back. And for a split second, I thought he was asleep. Like he had just drifted off, and my compliments and all of that were just some kind of bedtime story for him. But a few seconds later, he goes, "Who's talking to me?" He was completely freaked out. He had no idea who in the room had just said all of those really nice things to him. He was befuddled, would be the best word that I could come up with for what he was experiencing. And I remember laying there going, how is it possible he didn't hear anything I just said? Not a word, because he was still trying to figure out who was saying it. I realized Dan was not actually in the room with me. Even though physically he was, mentally he was somewhere else trying to name that voice. And then he said, "Well, tell me again, what did you say?" And I had such a hard time saying it again. It was hard to pick back up where I had left off, because it felt like when I had said it the first time, it had fallen on deaf ears and it was kind of meaningless. And Dan and I have figured it out, and we're all good now, and I love the guy with all my heart. But in that moment, it was just this strange moment of somebody that I thought would be right there was not there. Now, my guess is, at some point in your life, because it's been true in my life, you felt that way about God. These moments where you thought God would be really close, and you get into the heat of whatever struggle you're going through, and you start to feel and wonder, is he even in the same room as me? Is he even paying attention? Does he know what's going on? Reality is that sometimes God feels furthest when things fall apart. So in your life, it might be that you have lost a job recently. It might be that you're going through a divorce. It might be that you are estranged from your adult child. It might be any number of things, but in that moment, you kind of pour your heart out and go, this is hard and this is painful and I don't want to experience this anymore. God, where are you? And at least for a split second, we think, he's anywhere but here. Did he even hear what I just said? Does he even care about what I'm feeling? And then, if he does signal us some way, somehow, that he is in the room, well, how do we just pick up and act like we didn't have that moment of wonder and uncertainty? How do we just start navigating it again? That's why the sentence that I want to share with you is so vitally important. And it comes from the Psalms. It was written by David, and it was written at a really interesting time. And this is what David says. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. If you're anything like me, you've wondered this. Is he really close? I mean, for some of us, we've experienced a lot of heartbreak over the last few months. Whether it's our senior pastor leaving our church or our campus closing or any number of any other things that you and I are experiencing every single day of our life, we've wondered, if, as I'm sitting here brokenhearted, is God close? And David would say, yes. He is close. I know he's close because I've been where you've been. Like I said, David wrote this on the heels of a very bizarre time in his life. If you know anything about the story of David, he was picked by God to be the king of Israel, but he was picked by God to be the king after the people had picked another guy to be the king, and his name was Saul, and he had been the king of Israel for a long time, and along comes a guy named Samuel who was a prophet, and he said, well, God's chosen David to be the next king, and you can imagine how, unsettling it would be for a king to hear that somebody else has been named king. And then, David is the guy that killed Goliath, and everybody thought he was amazing, and they'd written songs about him being the giant slayer, and he was kind of a hero to everybody. They were so excited for him to become the king that Saul wanted to kill David. Why allow a threat to your throne to continue to live? Eliminate that threat, right? And so David, more than anybody, has experienced the things that you and I experience. Now, we may not have a king chasing us, but David experienced things like fear. He would have felt afraid with the king of Israel pursuing him, constantly threatening him. He would have definitely experienced that. And what's amazing in this moment when David writes this is he's been fleeing Saul for so long, and he ends up with this priest, and he lies to the priest. The priest wants to know, well, why are you here, and why are you here without the king? And David makes up this story about a special mission, and he talks about these enemies that are pursuing him, and how can you help me defend myself? And what's really, really crazy, and to be honest with you, until this week when I was looking at this stuff, I'd never heard this part. He says, do you have any weapons we could have? And the priest says, well, actually, I have Goliath's sword. You can have that. The same Goliath that David had slain, the priest has that sword and he gives it to David to fight. And they run off from the priest from there and they go to this place called Gath, which is a Philistine city. And in case you don't know this, Goliath was a Philistine and they're like the mortal sworn enemies of Israel at the time. And so David gets into town and starts to realize this is a dangerous place to be. I'm known as the Philistine killer. And oh, by the way, I'm lugging around the sword of the guy I killed. So he says, I got to get out of here. But before he gets away, he is recognized, and he's brought before the kind of king of Gath, the king of that city, and David pretends to be crazy. He pretends to be totally insane to the point where he makes himself foam at the mouth, and he's clawing on doors, and it acts totally, totally crazy. Before he's sent away by the king and he runs off and he hides in a cave. I mean, when was the last time you were so afraid that you pretended to be crazy? David was. The same David that said, God is near to the brokenhearted. David experienced that fear. He also experienced loss. Saul's son is named Jonathan. And Jonathan was David's best friend. And they could no longer be friends because Jonathan's dad wanted to kill him. Now, maybe you've had a former girlfriend or boyfriend's dad want to kill you, but hopefully none of your best friends in your life, their dad ever wanted to kill you, but that was David. And he had to say goodbye to a friendship just to stay alive. Think about all of the relationships that would have ended because of what God had called him to. God had called him to become the king, and that was going to come with some expense relationally. And David, person after person, has to experience that loss. To get all the way to the place where you are willing to pretend you're insane, you have to have felt broken. You have to have felt like on the inside, things are just falling apart, and I can't make sense of things, and I can't come up with a plan, and I can't get this goal in my mind, and I can't even figure out how to take the first step towards the goal if I could. Like, things are just not okay, mentally and emotionally. Again, maybe you've never been to that extreme as David is, but you've been somewhere on that spectrum where you felt fear, and you felt loss, and you felt broken. Again, for some of us, it's been that for the last couple months, and we're just not sure what to do. An interesting thing happens for David when he's in the cave. Other people start to find out he's there, his family being one group of people, and they come around him, but there's also all of these other people that come up alongside of him too, and this is how they're described in 1 Samuel. Then others began coming, men who were in trouble or in debt or who were just discontented. Eugene Petersen wrote a paraphrase of the Bible. We call it The Message. And this is how he kind of translated that same passage. All who were down on their luck came around, losers and vagrants and misfits of all sorts. If ever you wondered what the brokenhearted looked like, it's here. God makes it so that all of these folks that are coming from all different corners of the region come together with their misfit feelings and their brokenheartedness and their loss and they're in debt and they're all of these kinds of things. And they come together around David, who's also feeling those things. And it says that David becomes their leader. And whether David wrote that psalm as just a reflection on his own life or to some degree an instruction for the people that had gathered around, it's in the midst of all those things that he's sensing the presence of God, that God has come close to him in his brokenheartedness. What's so interesting, again, about you and me is when things don't go according to plan, when the wheels fall off, it's when we just start to believe whatever it is, God is not in it. This chapter, you name the chapter, divorce, job loss, illness, loneliness, uncertainty, you get to label the chapter. Whatever it is, when it's not good, we assume God must not be in it. Certainly he wouldn't be a part of that. This is why humanity's wrestled for so long with if there's evil in the world and God is so good, then how can the two be in the same world? If God's all powerful and all good, why doesn't he put an end to it? God must not be real because there's a lot of bad stuff. Bad stuff means the absence of God for so many of us. And David could have thought the same thing. We could think the same thing. We're all walking around to some degree with a sense of loss lately. And we could go, well, maybe God's not in this then anymore. He was, but maybe not. And if David were here in the flesh, he'd come alongside of us and he'd go, whoa, hold on. Let me tell you about my life. Let me tell you about the things in my life that I've experienced. And here's what I've come to know, that God's close to the brokenhearted. I think David might go so far as to say it like this: God is closest when we think he's furthest. That in those moments where we think God has left us, or he's abandoned us in our confusion, he's actually the closest than maybe any other day. It's this weird dynamic with God, that if I'm being totally honest with you, I wish it was different. I wish it wasn't in the hardest parts of life that we grew the closest to God. I wish it wasn't in the most difficult moments where we learned the most. It'd be much easier if we could just learn in the happy times and grow in the good times. But over and over again, God is closest when we think he's furthest. Now, here's what's really cool about God being close in our brokenheartedness. And I'm going to take us all the way back to the second book of the Bible and in Exodus. And you might be familiar with this story. It's when Moses encounters the burning bush. And this is the moment where God is going to tell Moses, I want you to pull my people out of Egypt. You're going to be their leader. I'm going to go with you, in front of you, behind you, around you. I'm going to help you. You're going to bring them out of Egypt. This is a huge, huge moment. But something gets said from the bush. Now, the burning bush is the presence of God, and it's kind of difficult for us to wrap our mind around. But God says something to me that I think is so important to Moses. This is what he says. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. My guess is Moses has walked on that dirt 100 times before. My guess is Moses has tended sheep or traveled between cities, and he's walked right past that bush before. It was not holy then until the presence of God arrived. And then all of a sudden, anything around God became holy because God is holy. Proximity to God changes the nature of everything close. You might be able to pick up where I'm going. When we hear that God is close to us in our brokenheartedness, it brings something into the equation when he enters, because God has this kind of ripple effect with everything. When he's near, anything that touches his presence is holy all of a sudden. Again, this dirt turns into more than dirt, to the point where God says, take off your shoes. You know, when you walk into somebody's home, first thing you do when you walk through the door is look down to see, is this the home where all the shoes get piled at the door because we don't walk around in our shoes, or can I keep my shoes on? And if there's a pile of shoes there, you know there's some kind of reverence for the carpet or the floor or the finish on the floor or something, right? We're going to respect this place. And so we take our shoes off. And God says, this dirt that's just dirt is a place of reverence now, because I am here. Here's what's so cool. The story of God and his relationship to humanity did not stay in Exodus. The story progresses and we get all of the way to the part that you and I have banked our whole lives on. And we come across this sentence over and over again every December 25th of the year, where the angels visit the earthly parents of Jesus. And there's a proclamation made about the one that was to be born, and this was that proclamation. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Jesus coming was this burning bush moment for each and every one of us. The dirt in our life, the stuff that seems so pointless and meaningless, the stuff that seems so barren and broken and empty and worth nothing, all of a sudden has meaning because Jesus has walked into the scene, and in your life, he's walked into your life. And all of that stuff, just like the dirt that Moses encountered, needs to have our shoes taken off to enter into it because all of a sudden God is near. God is close. In your brokenheartedness, there's meaning because Jesus comes close to you in the middle of it. So when you're afraid, Jesus says things like this: "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." When you're exhausted, Jesus says, "Come near to me. I'm going to help you." The imagery here is a yoke between two oxen pulling something, and Jesus says, "We'll share this. I'll go with you. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm going to be right next to you the whole way through." And in the moments that you and I feel lost, Jesus said this to his first disciples, and he says it to you over and over again: "Then come, follow me. You don't know the way? I know the way. You don't know how to get through this? I know how to carry you through this. Just follow me." I love that those are the words Jesus used. This is so much more than just become a Christian. It's I'll walk through life and show you the way through. Just follow me. Lastly, Jesus said things like this: "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. My power works best when you don't have anything left in the tank. My power works best when you're at your lowest moment. My power works best when you don't know what's next. My power works best when you don't know what to do. This is when I'm going to shine. I'm going to step into this with you. I'm going to come close to you in this and change the very fabric of that thing." So the proximity piece enters the picture. And all of a sudden, the thing we didn't think God was in, we realize Jesus is in. And the core, the crux of all of it has meaning. It's not just circumstantial. It's not just bad luck. It's not just I drew the short straw. It's that Jesus comes close, the God of everything, the creator of everything, brings holiness to our sorrow, to our lowest moments. Sorrow is holy ground. It may not feel that way. And we may not like that we've got to be in that place, but rest assured, God is near to the brokenhearted. And God is closest when we think he's furthest. So here's my encouragement to you. Don't grieve alone. Grieve with. I don't know what it is you're grieving. I've given a couple lists over the course of our time together today. So you fill in the blank. Don't grieve that by yourself. Don't assume that God has abandoned you, that God is far off and that he's not paying attention, or that he doesn't even care. I would encourage you to actually grieve with God. Like out loud with God. And here's the good news that I can promise you is he can handle it. You're not going to say anything or think anything or feel anything that he can't deal with. Because this verse that we looked at from David in the Psalms, it was pretty tame. If you read the rest of Psalms, there's these moments where you're like, if I were God, I'd kill that dude right now. Because he's being really disrespectful. He seems to have forgotten who I am and who he is. But that isn't God's response at all. David outwardly questions. Are you really in control? Are you really good? Do you really care about me? He doesn't pull a single punch. And do you know what God called David? A man after his own heart. And more often than not, David was this raw, emotional, frustrated person. But he was grieving all of those moments, those difficult moments, with God. I want to encourage you to not grieve alone, but grieve with others. What I've experienced in my life is that a lot of times the way God heals my heart and makes me feel whole is with other people. When I'm willing to be vulnerable and honest and humble and say, I'm really struggling. This chapter of my life has been a difficult chapter. It's like God's holiness touches the person that I've shared that with, and that brings the holiness into my sphere. And that person ministers to me, cares on me, loves on me, lets me lean on their shoulder. I think one of the greatest gifts God has ever given us is just other people. When we care for each other. That's the real work of God in our lives and through our lives. Lastly, just to make sure this is clear, grieve with messiness. Do not think that you have to come to God with your frustrations and your uncertainties and your pain all buttoned up. Our church all the time says, come as you are. You know where we got that? We got that from God. That's not an idea original to us. We're just trying to be who he is. And God says to you, come as you are. Do not worry about having it figured out intellectually or emotionally or spiritually. You don't have to know how this works. You don't have to be a psychology major and be able to identify all the different parts of your psyche and come to me and label them all and have it all sorted. No, you just come to me all kinds of messed up. Because it's what I want most. I want the real you. And I'll listen. And I'll care. So come with all the messiness. Make sure that you understand this. We so often confuse absence of God with sorrow. When we're feeling pain, we think God must not be here. But that is not the case. Because what David said is God is close to the brokenhearted. Don't assume that when you've lost something that God is not going to have there be any kind of purpose in what's coming next. Sometimes we think this is the end, and we talked about this last week. Sometimes endings are actually beginnings. They're a means to another end. And that's the gift of God so often in our life. So don't assume that because one chapter is coming to a close that there's not going to be great purpose and a great experience in the next chapter. Maybe the best one is just a turn of the page away. Make sure that you don't confuse change with a lack of meaning in what was. Sometimes we might go, well, maybe we should have never done this thing in the first place. We should have never married so-and-so. We should have never started that campus. We should have never taken that job. We should have never gone on that vacation. We should have never bought that thing. And we can sometimes just go, well, because it's not working out in the end the way we think it should, it robs it of all of the meaning. I don't think that's the way God works at all. In fact, if you go back and you read the story of Israel and its slavery in Egypt, what Moses at the burning bush was called to lead them out of, there were all kinds of circumstances that seemed like bad moments, endings along the way that propelled it into this story that you and I, thousands of years later, are learning from. There can still be meaning in the past, even though something is changing in the present. This is how Paul puts it. All you need to remember is that God will never let you down. And then he goes on to say this. He'll never let you be pushed past your limit. He'll always be there to help you come through it. You see, I grew up being told something that is not in the Bible. And I'm going to tell you what it is, and you've been probably said that to you over and over again. God will never give you more than you can handle. That's not true. In fact, he'll always give you more than you can handle. What he promises is that he'll never give you more than he can handle. He'll never give you more than he isn't willing to walk through with you. Your loss, your pain, your brokenheartedness, he's going to come close to you. He's going to change the fabric of what it means and bring holiness into it. So it's not about you and what you are capable of overcoming. It's what he can overcome. And he'll use these moments in our lives where we feel like everything is lost and turn them into something amazing. Because God is closest when we think he's furthest. That night in Haiti, Dan was right next to me. And our relationship is better than it's ever been, and that is a funny story that each of us have told over and over again. And one day, for each of us, we'll have a story to tell too. How God was close when we thought he was far. And that thing, that moment, that chapter changed everything. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, thank you for not being a God who is far off. Thank you for not being a God who wound up creation and let it just go off on its own. Thanks for not being a God who's sitting on a couch being entertained by a remote story. Thanks for being a God who's deeply involved in our lives. And when those lives seemingly have the wheels come off, you're even closer. Thanks for being a God who redeems, a God who makes holy. Thanks for being a God who makes old things new. So as we face our trials and our challenges and our losses and our insecurities, we trust that you will be close because that's who you are. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for joining us here at Great Lakes Church. Again, my name is Carson, and I'm so glad that you chose to share some time with us this week. We hope something in this talk was meaningful to you, encouraging to you, and maybe even something worth writing down that you can go share with a friend. If you'd like to get involved, maybe join us at one of our physical locations in Southeast Wisconsin, or just be a part of our many other goings on our social platforms or events in the area. Check out greatlakeschurch.com.